brought to you by Renegade River.
Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station. Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station at downtown Spring Lake.
News Talk 1090 is the talk of Muskegon.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. Today we've got my often co-guest, Jim Riley.
I'm the co-guest.
Well,
good afternoon.
What was it George Moss called you, the hostess?
He called me the hostess. That is correct. I am not the hostess. There we go.
And in the studio with us today is Nick Sundquist, who is a Republican primary challenger in the Michigan State Senate race, 34th District. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks very much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Nick, we've got a whole handful of really, really tough questions. Are you ready?
Yep, fire away. Let's have them.
I'll go first. Tell us a little bit about your background, Nick.
That's a tough question?
Yep.
I guess there's not really an awful lot to say when you get right down to it. I'm a self-employed fellow for the last 20 years nearly and happily married.
Employed at?
The dentist.
So you are a dentist, or are you a dental assistant? Or
properly misspelled D-E-N-T-E-S-T.
And what is that?
We take small dents out of automobiles, mostly using a paintless process. We push them out from underneath with a wide variety of stainless steel rods and whatnot.
And I can attest to the fact that It Works Honey Bunch has taken her car to your business. You weren't there when she was there.
Had I known that Honey Bunch was coming, I would have insisted she get a discount.
She is now dentless, and there's nothing happier in America today than a dentless Honey Bunch.
We have an awful lot of happy customers.
But it is your business, really, it's a business that's dependent upon the misfortunes of others.
Yeah, I'd like to feel bad about that, but I can't. When I tell customers, come back again soon, I mean it.
All right. All right. But you're a guy who's to me, this is what makes America go, and that is the small businessman. You hire people, you pay your bills, you pay taxes. Hopefully you make a profit and you pay income taxes on that also. So,
yes, we do.
So you
we
got
do
experience
all those things, yes.
that not many people in this country really have.
Nick, how many kids have you got now?
My daughter was born last Sunday, right around noon.
Oh,
and
congrats.
that makes 4.
Very, very nice.
Yeah.
Last Sunday.
Pink and she's a nice shade of pink and has all her parts and bits in the right places, and so we're all real happy.
Well,
Very,
and plus
very
she's
nice.
listening to the show today, which is going to almost double our regular Sunday listenership.
Wow.
Gotta love that.
She's going to be an informed voter too.
All right. Love it.
Very good. Now tell us this, speaking about being an informed voter, tell the voters, if you would, Nick, what causes you to be a primary challenger? Why are you in the race?
Well, like an awful lot of people out there, I suspect you get tired of yelling at your radio and television set, and so I decided that I probably ought to try to do something about it to change things. I'd like to peel away the rules and regulations that make it so difficult for Michiganders to chase their dreams. I've had some modest successes in business, and largely because the business I'm in is not very heavily regulated at the moment. So if you're pursuing some business that's already an established industry, it sure makes your life an awful lot more difficult.
That makes sense. Now you were in this race before, am I right?
The 34th district race?
Right.
Yes, that's right.
Now, and before is a different party. What party are you? You are a Republican primary challenger now.
I'm a Republican primary challenger. We have, I've joined the Republican Party. I'm a delegate. I went to the last state convention. I'm a Republican.
The reason I'm asking that is that some of the comments. Understand, I've been a primary challenger before also, so
I remember.
It seems like only yesterday.
Right.
But the reason I'm asking is coming from a different party, I'm wondering that should you win, if you're going to have a problem caucusing with the Republican caucus in Michigan's state Senate.
I shouldn't think so. Other than the progressive wing of the Republican caucus, the Libertarian Party has got as much diversity of opinion as the Republican Party does, perhaps more, and certainly as much as the Democrat Party does. If you were to take the party platforms of either of those parties, you'd discover that they have an awful lot more in common than they have differences.
Tell me this on tax. There's been a perpetual debate for most of my adult life, beginning with flat tax, and frankly, I think Ronald Reagan tried flat tax to some success. Although since he enacted flat tax federally, that's been stretched out into a monster-sized progressive stair-step program now. But on a state level, there's ongoing debate between fair tax and flat tax versus just trying to moderate the tax system or tax code that we currently have. Where are you on that question?
On that particular question, I'd like to just eliminate the income tax altogether. There's no good reason to have it.
Do you mean state or federal or both?
I'm talking state. As a state senator, I only use the example of federal to say that there have been a number of debates going for a very long time, going way back even beyond Ronald Reagan. But on a state level, currently there is. I'm a district director for Michigan Fair Tax. I'm pretty much staked my claim. That's where I'm at. Now, having said that, I'm not running for state senate. So I look to you, say, are you flat tax? Are you fair tax? Now, you said that you'd want to eliminate the income tax. Then with that in mind, how would you see the method to fund state government? Because regardless of the fact we probably all agree the funding needs to be reduced, it still needs a revenue stream of some level.
Most assuredly, the government needs revenue to run, to do the things that are necessary, but the income tax amounts to just over 10% of our budget. It's $6 billion. In a $54 billion budget, it doesn't amount to that much. I think we can afford to cut state government by 10%. During Mr. Hansen's tenure in office, I'm sure that there are an awful lot of listeners out there that have had to reduce their family's budget by that much. The state government can and should do it.
Well, now, let me just go back to this, because there are some states that are quite famous for not having state income tax, and of course one of them being Florida, which is the home of any number of athletes and entertainers, and they've been upfront in saying that they moved to that state because of their lack of a penalty for being successful and not having a state income tax. There are some real significant benefits. The downside, of course, is that revenue will be gone, and the state of Michigan would have to either replace it, or it would have to cut back, or probably do some kind of combination of the two. But what are the benefits to not having that tax, aside from individuals having more of their money to spend? But what are the other benefits that have come up in other states? Obviously, one is wealthy people and other kinds of successful people moving to your state.
Government revenue is somehow in Michigan is always regarded as a good thing, so long as the government has a lot of money. The less money the government has, the easier it is for people to pursue their dreams. And the income tax is a way to control people. It's a way to do favors for certain industries at the expense of other industries. Michigan and the other states that have income taxes are anemic. The economy is anemic by comparison to the states that don't have it. We're all just going to be an awful lot better off if they cut the revenue from the government and make them concentrate on the core functions of government.
One of the things you've talked about pretty consistently in that is the size of government. And where are you on the concept of a part-time legislature?
Absolutely. We should have a part-time legislature. Michigan's one of only 4 states in the union to have a full-time legislature. If you had a part-time legislature, there would be a legislative calendar that would be easy for people to look at to see when it was necessary to introduce proposed legislation, and opportunity for groups that were against particular legislation to rally the troops and talk to the representatives and senators in the state government. The argument that the governor has more control is also, in my opinion, wrong, in as much as the legislature still has all the very same duties it did before you went to part-time, and it just takes them a lot longer to accomplish anything, which in Michigan, that would certainly be a good idea.
You know, the irony of the argument that says the governor would be too powerful is one of the most successful comparisons is, of course, Texas, where by definition that governor is a weak governing executive chair. And so you say, how can it be that here in Michigan we have, well, first off, let me kind of add a caveat. A lot of legislators campaigned on part-time legislation, and then when they get there, they seem to somehow forgot or have forgotten all of the campaign part of the fact that they were campaigning for part-time legislation. But then somehow they miraculously say this job is too busy. And the one thing I've heard a lot over is, Mike, you just don't understand what all we do. Well, the truth of it is that I really do. And so do the other 40 plus states that have a part-time legislature. They understand exactly what needs to be done. But in Michigan, in my view, we've developed a culture whereby the way they define a good legislator is one who can sponsor a bill and get it shepherded through the law. And I don't know that that's a great culture to run a state by how many laws we can create and thereby more tax, more liberty lost, etc. But what's your thinking on that? Now, I guess my question for you is, let me ask you another way. I'm assuming the answer, but I don't want to do that. You're going to campaign on a part-time legislature, is that correct?
That's right.
And then when you win, you're going to
introduce a bill to enact a part-time legislature.
Okay, that's where you're at, period.
That's where I'm at, period. There is, I mean, you talk about Texas and the argument, the bogus argument that the governor is going to have more power. Look, we should compare Texas economy to Michigan's and say to ourselves that's what we ought to be emulating. And your point that the legislatures are in there making new laws and that somehow the more laws you get passed, can I say MichiganVotes.org on the air?
I've said it a lot of times.
You can say anything
please,
you like.
No,
please,
don't say that.
Go to MichiganVotes.org and look at your Mr. Hansen's record or any of the legislature's record. And what you'll discover is the first time you look down the list of bills they introduce, you say to yourself, oh, golly, why not? And it's not that bad and can't hurt and it's probably a good idea. And then you look at it again. I want you to read them all twice at least and ask yourself, is it really necessary? Is it a good use of your money? Is it a good use of your time or the time of the bureaucrats in Lansing that are running around causing all sorts of misery across the state? And I think that you'll agree with me that what we need is sensible legislation, not lots of it.
Well, you are running, and I like what I'm hearing here, but let's be open and honest about this. You are a conservative Republican running against a very successful and at this up to this point anyway, very popular Republican state senator in Jeff Hansen. So you essentially are trying to say that you don't like the way that Jeff Hansen has voted, and you would vote in a different manner. You mentioned Michigan Votes, and to me this is important because you've got to do your homework because, unfortunately, MLive, Muskegon Chronicle, and just about every other media, with the exception of Mike's show, the Renegade River show, does not talk about local politics. The Michigan Votes is put together by the Mackinac Center, which is a conservative think tank, one of the very few here in the state of Michigan. And what's really nice about the Michigan Votes, and I'm going to suggest, if I can just to stick my nose here, it's MichiganVotes.org. And when you go to that page, they've got up at the top, they've got a bunch of links, and the fourth one over is scorecards. You can go to the scorecards, and those are put together by different groups, but tend to be conservative Tea Party types, who will list in English all of the votes that they believe are of import over, let's say, 2013 or 2012. And then you can see how your legislator, be it a state rep or a state senator, has voted. And they've got little check marks, and you can order it by ranking in terms of most conservative or by party or what have you. But if you look at Senator Hansen's rankings, almost across the board, and this goes from 2013, goes all the way back through his Senate, and I would imagine you might even be able to go back and look at his 6 years as state representative.
You can.
But he tends to be at the bottom of the Republicans, the elected Republicans, when it comes to his voting record. And, of course, generally, he's considerably more conservative than the most conservative Democrat. The Democrats have really stayed the course, if you will, in terms of hardcore socialism and voting as a bloc. But Senator Hansen, when it comes to all of the other elected Republicans, almost always is either at the bottom or one of the most liberal, moderate, what have you, elected officials that we've got in our state. So I don't think it's unfair, and I would expect that he would be proud of his voting record. But I don't think it's unfair to say, look, our senator has voted for these things, that if you are a primary voting Republican and you disagree, well, now for the first time in a while, you have a choice in the Republican primary, which of course is not it's a year from now, but it gives you a choice, and do your homework. And MichiganVotes.org is one of those great tools to see how he has voted in the past. And of course, we've got another almost an entire year of votes to check on his record going forward.
Yeah, let me dovetail that, Nick, and just to try to murky it up a little bit, maybe by accident. Two things. First off, if you go back a decade, 03, 04, somewhere in that area, so maybe not just shy of a decade, there were state representatives and state senators that were missing hundreds and hundreds of votes. And the reason I'm bringing that up now is that MichiganVotes.org really single-handedly, because you can, right now, listeners, you can dial up whoever your state legislator is and look and see how many votes did he or she miss, what are they voting on, what have they sponsored, what have they co-sponsored, so you can dial right into exactly how you're being represented. Now, the murky part is this that I want to throw out for both of you to kind of, especially you, Nick, to chew up a little bit. Yes, Jeff Hansen, I've known you, Nick, since 1998, I think we figured out.
Yeah.
And I first met Jeff Hansen back in 04 or 05, probably 05. I tell you, I've known both of you a long time. And frankly, your politics is closer to my ideology than Jeff's. Having said that, when I look at the district that you folks are campaigning in, your district in total is a much more modest district than my ideology is, and that's a concern. So when I look at Jeff and I look at his voting record, I'm in complete agreement with Jim and how he's identified them, and I'm also I understand what would cause you to say I want to primary challenge him. But then I reflect and say, what's the purpose of a representative if not to properly represent his constituency, which tends to be moderate in a district that frankly could go back and forth between parties back and forth. So I think we've got to go to a break, and when we do, maybe you can pick up where I left off.
I'd be happy to.
Very fair. We'll be right back, folks. Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show with Jim Riley, Mike Hewitt, and our guest, Nick Sonquest, who is a primary challenging candidate for state senate in the 34th District. Nicholas, are you ready?
Yeah.
He's a Republican candidate.
He is a Republican primary challenging candidate. He absolutely is. Nicholas, when we went to break, I was asking you about what I perceive at least as a moderate district. We're talking about Jeff Hansen being a moderate Republican, and I'm looking at a moderate district. So I'm looking for you to tell me where I'm missing the boat, or what your view of that is.
Well, I think Edmund Burke once said, and I have to paraphrase, that a representative owes not only his industry to his constituents, but also his judgment. And when Senator Hansen is on the campaign trail, he talks about how he wants to help small business. And I have yet to see any bills that he's introduced that would do anything to help small business. The other thing is this, I guess, that the voters ought to have some sense of what they're getting when they elect someone. You know, his district may be moderate, but he got elected telling everyone he was a conservative, didn't he?
Fascinating. Now, tell me this, though. Is there something to the... that may be true. I got to tell you, I didn't watch his campaign, but is there something to the notion that from your political position, those folks that may not normally agree with a soundbite can be reason to see why you take the stance you do on given issues?
I certainly hope so. You have an election to discuss the issues of the day, and the candidates that best represent the solutions that you believe are going to work are the ones or the majority of the voting public believes are the ones that are going to work, are presumably the candidates that they want to elect. And so when you get a candidate that says one thing and then goes into office and does something else, regardless of the makeup of the district, we're not having an honest debate anymore, are we?
I got to tell you something funny on a little bit of a side note. For the listeners that are not familiar with who Edmund Burke is, he was a philosopher, a politician, a a statesman of the 1700s. And in the novel I wrote, America's Final Beginning, the name of my president was President Burke. And a good portion of the ideology that makes up that novel was wrapped around the philosophy that Edmund Burke left actually the world with, because he was from Europe. So made me smile when you referenced him.
A great book that you can get on Amazon.com for your Kindle.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Which I have, as does Honey Bunch.
No, I enjoyed your novel, and it caused me actually to look up an Edmund Burke quote, and that's where I stole that from, actually.
It's funny how politics is really a really small little community. Next question. Tell me what, you're kind of you're a classical liberal, to use a term. And with that, I got to ask you, where are you at on the topic of abortion?
I'm anti-abortion, primarily because of all of the victims that are. Everybody's a victim in abortion. There's just no getting around it.
In the case of rape?
I don't know. Does it seem proper to you to penalize the children for the sins of the fathers?
I'm still thinking he read my platform.
Well, you know what I find refreshing? Whether you agree or you don't agree, you didn't hesitate. You went right into a very, very contentious argument and jumped right in with your views, clear and concise. One of the things that has always bothered me about any politician, be they Republican, Democrat, or what have you, is the almost knee-jerk equivocation that we get. They're not willing to answer the tough questions. And that takes courage, and it frankly takes someone who has strong beliefs. I really respect what your response there. I'm not necessarily saying I agree with it, but how refreshing it is to have a candidate, really answer the question from the heart and tell them what they're thinking.
Listen, I got to tell you something on that point. Because first off, you and I, Jim, 100% agree with that. We've had Republicans on this show before that, and we've talked about it in shows thereafter. Representative Shirkey, who's advanced the Medicaid explosion, as I call it, through the House of Representatives. I completely, absolutely disagree with him. On the other hand, he's went around the state and said, this is why I've done what I've done. He's been on this show and said, this is what I've done. And I'll take that a step further. I like Jeff Hansen. However, his lack of taking a position on this particular topic of the Medicaid explosion greatly concerns me when we've only got a limited number of Republicans in a very small Senate to cause that to be one way or another. I think that Governor Snyder's Medicaid explosion is going to have an extremely negative impact on every citizen in the state of Michigan. And so for Jeff Hansen not to take a position on that, rather offering this big, long, really ambiguous position statement, I found that a little bit disconcerting. And so I bring that up now because, to Jim's point, you did immediately pick up on that topic, even though abortion somehow is like a litmus test or a lightning rod, a state representative nor a state senator will have virtually no effect on it whatsoever. So it's always kind of fascinated me that it becomes part of a topic.
State senator or state representative could have an awful lot of effect on it.
Give me an example.
They have heartbeat bills across the country right now. And forgive me, I don't remember which states they're in, but these are things that can be done. Properly speaking, it's a states' right issue, and every state that has they're either narrowly defeated, very narrowly defeated. It's a contentious issue that, frankly, I'd rather not talk about. I wish it wasn't necessary to talk about it.
Tell me on it, let's change gears a little bit, if I might. Over the last 2 years or so, maybe more, we've seen a whole new level of the definition of emergency manager. Emergency manager in terms, I think it's been on the books since 1988, but Governor Snyder's reinvented what emergency manager means. And so I can certainly rationalize what his reasoning is with what he's done, but I'm more looking to say, what is your opinion of the concept of a very powerful, strong-armed emergency manager?
I find it just a little bit frightening, frankly. If you go through, the courts should be the emergency managers in bankruptcy cases. I don't know how to say it any more simply than that.
What I found is in fact, we've had a couple people on over the last few weeks that specifically have done that. In fact, one of them was a former president of a police union, and we were looking at the other side of the coin, because it's my opinion that if you make a handshake deal with somebody, you honor it. You don't say, sorry, I've changed my mind and something else better has come along. But having said that, moving beyond that part of the debate, the one thing I did get out of all of that is I was able to sit back and watch how emergency managers function. And frankly, I was flabbergasted. I truly was taken back. My original concept of what an emergency manager is was a financial analyst, a guy or a girl that would come in and say, this is what I'm seeing in your books and this is my recommendations. That's how it was sold, or at least that was my interpretation of the selling pitch, the campaign that was in defense of an EM. But what I saw in practice, both in Detroit, but specifically and especially Pontiac, was a little warlord that there was actually absolutely no check and balance over this person's authority to do whatever the heck he wanted it. And I'm going, wow, are we still in America when I watch this guy move with sweeping decisions? So what's your take on that? Where would you be? How good is this something you feel that the legislative body can reel in? Should it be reeled in?
It absolutely should be reeled in. The whole country right now seems to be lost in a sea of lawlessness. The president's gone on about just changing a law that was passed by the legislature on basically his own whim. And to have an emergency manager leaves the rule of law out of the whole equation. It absolutely should be reeled in.
You know, I don't want to get you deeper into this at this point, but I think this is an issue, and this is a specific question of what do you think about the emergency manager, because we will be seeing over the next 1 year, over the next 52 weeks, a cascade of dominoes, and those dominoes being cities, townships, counties in our state who will be failing financially. And at some point, someone is going to have to come up with an answer of how these municipalities will be funded going forward. I'm not sure I agree or disagree with the concept of the financial manager, but if it is fuzzy, if it as Mike says that it's worthy of at least looking at a little more closely, I would hope that this discussion would continue and expand, because here in Muskegon County, of course, we have the city or the Muskegon Heights school system that's already disappeared and is under a financial manager. But we have the Muskegon Public Schools that has yet to get that financial manager appointed, but they've sort of bought themselves into the MAISD. We know that the city or the county is in the midst of significant expansion, not just of the jail, but many other big programs. And already, Saginaw County, Battle Creek, and Genesee counties have seen bond issues fail because they were trying to float bond issues, and there weren't any buyers for the bonds. So big things are going to be happening in the next 52 weeks. I would hope that we'll have a greater discussion of the financial manager as time goes on.
Me too. Let me change gears a little bit again. One of the things that we've talked about a lot over the last probably couple of months on this show is a concept that suggests you can't save America unless you save inner city. And to our friend, Jim and I's friend George Moss, you can't save inner city unless you save American family. And so I don't know that the government has some magic wand that can step in and save family. In fact, I think probably the best thing they could do to save family is to retreat from the overbearing power they've got in place right now. But having said that, where do you stand on the concept inside Michigan of equal parenting in the case of divorce? Rather than, in other words, I'm saying, where are you at on joint custody issues and equal parenting in that sad case when divorces take place? Rather than automatically assuming that a mother or a father having something, you follow what I'm getting at?
I understand. I understand the question. It's a really difficult question. My first instinct is to say, which parent is the child going to be better off with? And in many cases, I'm guessing that's the father, at least financially, is going to be able to have the financial wherewithal to take care of them. Although in today's world, I guess you have as many, in Michigan, you have as many mothers that are breadwinners in the households.
You know, my first introduction to politics was I was 30 pounds lighter and I still had all my hair. Life was good.
You don't look a bit different than you did when I met you in 1998.
Yeah, but your eyes
Jim,
have also changed.
He really is a politician. I can tell that when he said that.
And I am not.
No, the truth of it is, though, is I got involved with a group called Voices for the Children of Divorce. And it caused me to pause and say, okay, let's skip all of the rancor that goes along with divorce, because both sides, it seems, automatically start calling the other person names. I'll go, wait a minute, you lived with this person for X number of years, you love them, you had kids with them, and now they're all these filthy words. How can this be that person went through that metamorphosis just because you no longer want to live with them? And sadly, it seems too often that the children become the pawns in that battle. And my premise is this: I believe that children need both a mother and a father, not just a great dad or not just a great mother. And I think when I look at society, when I stand back and say, how can we resolve all of the problems in America? When I look at crime rates, murder rates, suicide rates, drug use, all of it goes back to, when I say all of it, I'm sweeping. Over 70% of it goes back to single parenting. And I'm saying, can the court system, can the state legislature give better direction to the courts on how best to handle raising children in the case of a divorce?
I think doing away with no-fault divorce would take us a long way down that road. I think that it might make it more difficult. People would think a little more carefully before they got married. You would change the culture in a way. Right now, it's sort of interesting. You get married, and most folks still say "till death do us part," and then the state gives you a license that says unless you get bored. We have no-fault divorce, and it's an ugly thing.
Phone call? The phone call?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Welcome. You're on the Renegade River Show. Who are we talking to?
Yeah, Kerry Krantz up in Rothbury. Mike, you alluded to about the state police chief or the city police chief and retirement and the pension. I was wondering where Mr. Sundquist stood on these people that are on their pensions, already retired, and now these pensions are going to be taken away from them possibly, and not having paid Social Security, and they're not going to be able to be on Social Security. I'd like to hear Mr. Sundquist's answer that question. Thank you.
Well, in bankruptcy proceedings, it's my understanding that normally assets are sold, and those assets are sold to pay off the creditors. The pensioners are, in this case, would be considered the creditors in a properly run bankruptcy proceeding.
So just to make sure I understand your answer to Kerry's question, is that those decisions should be made by a judge in the judiciary branch of our government.
Absolutely.
That's what he's saying. Kerry, does that answer your question?
Well, we have an emergency manager overseeing all this. Is he trying to forego that judiciary aspect of that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the emergency manager does forego it, though I have to say that you're probably better off with your emergency manager than a judge that actually understood law.
So it's very possible that these people that have worked for 30, 40 years as firemen and policemen are going to end up with no pension and no Social Security.
No, I disagree with that. I think that the emergency managers will do everything in their power to make sure that those people get their pensions.
I think, I don't want to step in for just a minute. I think part of what Kerry is going, I don't know what experiences you've got up there, but I know you listen to the show. And when we had a Pontiac police officer on here, he gave some pretty good definition as to what was happening with the pension, health insurances, etc. of the Pontiac police and the firemen and all public works of the city of Pontiac under the guide of an emergency manager who to me, by the way, an emergency manager acts as a political extension of the governor's office and is not seeking necessarily what's correct, but rather what's expedient. And I don't know that that's the proper cure. So my answer would be, I'm not the right guy to answer it, Kerry, but my answer is that EMs ought to be gotten rid of. And that, to Nick's point, I agree with part of his answer was that the city should be liquidating its assets before it refuses to pay pensions.
Then he doesn't feel that because these people voted in for these politicians that promised them these high paychecks that they deserve what they get?
I got to tell you, I know the particular instance in Pontiac very, very well. And first off, they didn't have high paychecks. They had less than the average state income, less than the community that they were serving's income. That debate aside, these were agreements that were they were put into ink in many cases 30 years ago. And the real problem here, by the way, is not necessarily mismanagement or fraud or everything else that the political hounds would like to paint it as, but in truth, The real problem is that the populations of these cities have been cut by in some cases 2/3. So you have these big gigantic police departments 20 years ago, and they needed them in the communities that they had, or supposedly they did. 1.5 million population. Now that population, by the last report, was at 500,000. There's your real problem. So the case becomes not who lied to who or who stole what, but rather how are we going to deal with these massive population reductions, which are truthfully the result of GM and their subsidiary companies and suppliers folding up and moving somewhere else, leaving these towns. I don't want to say leaving them high and dry. That's the nature of business, but it leaves decisions that have to be made. So the question becomes, who's going to make the decision? An EM who's Snyder's henchman, or a judge? And we can debate forever who the right person is to do that, but we got to go to a break. Kerry, thank you very much for calling in.
Okay, bye-bye.
Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show with my co-host, Jim Riley.
It's me, baby.
And Nick Sundquist, who is a Republican primary challenger in the Senate 34th District.
A pleasure to be back again.
It is. Hey, let's change gears again just for funsies. Tell me, where are you at on the question of Common Core and education here in the great state of Michigan?
Absolutely ought to be closed down.
Okay. It's a great way to sell books.
It's a great way to sell books. It's a great way to sell really bad books.
It looked like to me last year's books, a little bit watered down, one more notch of de-education, or what I affectionately refer to as miseducation, but it sold billions of books, so somebody somewhere is rubbing their little greedy hands together.
You can call it de-education. I prefer to think of it as indoctrination. There's very little education that's going on there.
What do you think they're replacing common sense with?
Mostly how to be a docile citizen. Do as you're told.
Oh, so it's a get in line manual.
Yep, they've been ringing bells at schools for a long time.
Speaking of getting in line, Nick, we're almost out of time, so I've got just a couple more questions for you. Where are you at from a state standpoint on immigration reform?
Immigration reform? I haven't heard any really good proposals on immigration from anywhere, frankly.
Well, when I look, of course, I know I'm an old school kind of guy here, but when I look at the state of Michigan, I still consider it a sovereign state. And so it causes me to look at immigration from a national point of view, considering I believe Michigan is a sovereign state. And so when I look at it that way, I think it's something that our state legislators should take up. And I think this. I think that having however many millions of people coming across the border is a problem, and also equally having someone go through the legal process and it taking them 15 to 18 years to become a citizen is a problem. So clearly we could all, if we just looked at it, set aside ideologies and just took a common sense approach to this, we do need immigration reform. And the question becomes, how is Michigan going to play a role in that? I'm
not sure what mechanism Michigan could or should use to play a role in that, but when our grandparents came here, they had to have a sponsor. There was no welfare state. In the absence of the welfare state, a lot fewer people would be concerned about immigration reform. When our grandparents came, they had to have a sponsor. There wasn't free medicine or schooling or anything else for them. For the most part, I guess the schools were free by the 100 years ago, but really, you'd be able to concentrate on the villains and everything the terrorists that people are worried about if you had some common sense. It shouldn't take 18 years to get to America. The United States of America, it takes 20 years to get into. Obviously, we can use the labor, or they wouldn't still be coming in by the hundreds of thousands every year. Tell me this, in a little bit of time we have left, if you win, what would be your legislative priorities, Nick? Thanks for asking. Health reform that makes sense. We absolutely do not need Obamacare. There are free market solutions to these problems. And please, anybody that wants to talk further about this can leave a message for us at Facebook at Nick for Michigan's 34th. We need a part-time citizen legislatures, not the full-time politicians that we have in Lansing right now. Parental control of education through an opportunity scholarship for all the students in Michigan. Where these things are tried anywhere in the country, they're universally well received. Would give teachers an opportunity for advancement and to do the jobs that they went into teaching to do, instead of conforming themselves to in different bureaucracies that exist across the state, and eliminate the income tax. This would be a huge boost to the economy, and would be make it more difficult for politicians to do favors for their corporate pals. And that brings me to the last point, is we need to end all the corporate welfare programs. It's simply unjust that an outfit called Jay's Sporting Goods has to pay taxes in Michigan so that politicians can pat themselves on the back for having brought in a new Cabela's store that's no different than the one that we already have, or the two that we already have here in the state of Michigan. Cabela's made, I don't remember how much money they made, $170 million last year, and the state of Michigan granted them $15 million in tax abatements. Meanwhile, local companies still have to pay all of those taxes.
As a local company, I noticed that.
There you have it.
Can we just go back on the first item that you mentioned? You talked about Obamacare, which I think the average Michigander here thinks is a national issue. Why would we even be talking about it locally? But there is a big vote that is likely to be taken sometime this month, and this is in the Michigan State Senate, the Republican-controlled Senate, where our local state senator, Senator Jeff Hansen, who you are going to be battling in this primary race a year from now, is not been open with how he is going to vote in terms of expanding Medicaid. And that has a lot to do with this Medicare, or with this Obamacare issue. Jeff Hansen, the current senator, we're getting vibrations, if you will, and that's all it is at this point, but we're getting vibes that he will vote with enough Republicans and Democrats so that, in fact, we will expand, or the state of Michigan will expand coverage to anywhere between 400 and 600,000 additional residents, not necessarily citizens, but residents in the state of Michigan in the Medicaid system, without really coming up with a long-term way to pay for it. So this is a vote that is going to be coming up probably before you have the election. Where do you stand on this expansion?
Look, we don't need the expansion. Mr. Hansen is quoted, I believe, on the day that the Supreme Court authorized the whole scheme as saying that this would be very harmful to Michigan small businesses. On that very day, he voted to introduce the exchange that would be necessary to do this. The expansion is an integral part of Obamacare. What Michigan ought to be doing is emulating Oklahoma, whose Attorney General is suing the federal government right now, today, because of the employer mandate. There's a little quirk in the law, the federal law, that says that the states, if they don't set up the exchanges, don't have to pay the employer mandate. That's what Michigan ought to be doing. 35 states have not set up the exchanges. 35 states have not set up the exchanges. Obamacare will fall if the employers aren't paying for it.
Is this vote to expand Medicaid combined with the setting up of exchanges, or are they separate issues?
It's my understanding they're slightly separate isures.
Okay.
They're all woven together. It's all part of one big picture.
Well, there's only 20,000 pages worth of regulations. I'm sure everybody fully understands all the repercussions of every single paragraph.
I got to tell you, the scary part is I don't believe that there's any individual. I don't think there's one person in America that actually understands that whole thing. Most people in our state legislature, both sides of the debate, don't seem to recognize that the Medicaid explosion is either the foundation for or the replacement of Obamacare if Obamacare fails. The irony to having so many Republicans cross over and join with the Democrats to vote for that is just mind-boggling to me. It's like I call them Snyder's Yes Club, because they're not looking at this rationally.
I think they're given an awful lot of money from the hospital lobby and from the HMO lobby, who stands a chance to make a lot of money on this.
It's funny that you mention that, because when you look at control, What happens right now, the hospitals are saying we're losing money because we're not allowed to charge at the emergency room door. What will happen, folks, is that once they're allowed to bill Medicaid for most of those recipients, Medicaid doesn't pay them as much as they normally get, and so then they will be allowed legally to increase their charges to other insurances, which will raise your cost. So your $9 Motrin tablet right now will become a $15 Motrin tablet for an overnight stay. But listen, we're almost out of time. Is there a way for folks to find you?
Yeah, please go to nickforsenate.com. That's Nick, the number 4, Senate.com, and from there you can easily find our link to Facebook. And again, I'd be happy to answer any questions that get posted there.
I want to just add one quick thing on that nickforsenate.com. Very clear points that you stand for. To me, it's very refreshing. There's no equivocation. You got them listed in one sentence form. My golly, how refreshing that is to have a politician say what they really believe.
Thank you very much. I guess that I believe the voters are entitled to know what the politicians actually think.
Listen, on all of those notes, when we banter these politics around every Sunday, I wanted to end today's show on a little bit of a different note, if I might. One of the benefits I have of working at Renegade River in Spring Lake is that every weekend especially, but through the week, but on weekends, I have a parade of fathers and mothers bringing their 3, 4, 5-year-olds in to get fishing bait, and it's a big event. They're in there picking out little tyke fishing poles, and they're getting night crawlers, and they're picking out the right bobber. And I got to tell you, when we hear so much, those of us that are plugged into the political environment, about all of this page after page of negative from both sides, by the way. I don't care if you're left. You got people that are fear-mongering, selling you folks nonsense, and on the right, they got folks selling you guys fear nonsense. But let me tell you, the people that I see coming into my little shop in Spring Lake, they're mothers and their fathers, and they're taking care of tomorrow's future. I got guys coming in, bringing in their 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old sons and daughters, looking at little 410 shotguns and little 22 single-shot plinkers. People that are really, really excited to go out and spend some quality time with the people that mean the most to them in their life. And I'm talking about the young people and how they view their parents. And folks, that's the foundation for tomorrow. Now, beyond anything that we could ever say here or anybody in Lansing or Washington is ever going to do, that's the foundation we've got to build on. It's tomorrow's future, and it's families being built today. Thank you very much, and I'll look forward to talking with you again next Sunday.
Brought to you by Renegade River.